Well, police are still hunting for surviving but unidentified suspects from the Brussels bombing. They are still on the run. Former CIA Operative Mike Baker is with me. Mike, so glad to have you back on the program. I have to ask you, as somebody who has worked to protect American citizens, what would you be doing now if you were on the case in Brussels?
Well, I'll be doing exactly what the authorities are doing, in concert with, liaising with the French authorities, the German authorities. FBI is there. Look, it's a methodical step-by-step process. So unfortunately, there's no magic bullet. You just have to work your way through the investigative and operational activities that you've got. You're tracing down every lead. You're interviewing and re-interviewing detainees that you've got, like Abdus-Salam and others that they've been able to pick up. You're running through all available CCTV footage. You're tracking down relatives and known associates. You're using communications intercepts. I want to go back, if I could, to something that Catherine pointed out. Catherine Herridge just said something that's really, really important here, and that is her reference to you need more than suspicion when it comes to then mounting surveillance operations or picking people up for detention. And we're beating the drum now. You're starting to see this groundswell of it's an intelligence failure, it's an investigative failure. How could they have been so useless in gathering up these individuals? I would argue it's not an intelligence failure in Belgium that's the problem. It's a failure of a legal and political system in Belgium to recognize a threat. It's more about civil liberties there is what you're saying. In other words, even though this guy, one of the bombers, shot at a police officer with a Kalashnikov, they say, okay, he spent time in jail for that, but that still doesn't prove that he's actually a terrorist and is going to try to blow up an airport wing. Absolutely. If you take a look at what the authorities, what the investigators, the intel service and law enforcement are actually allowed to do and what they're constrained to do because of a sort of a creaking legal system that creates all these firewalls between the different agencies and the prosecutors and investigators. They're not allowed to do communications intercepts or surveillance. They're not allowed to do, random house searches based on a probable cause. It's a very difficult system. So this is not an intelligence failure, again, so much as a failure of a government that has ladled on, in the name of privacy and civil liberties, a system
well, my guess is they're reviewing that. I mean, we saw in France, for example, emergency measures for 3 months, no questions asked. We want to come into your home in the middle of the night, we will. That's it. Like, civil liberties have been suspended. I want to ask you something. I hope you're not mad. As a former CIA, do you think now that the FBI is on the ground in Brussels, I mean, you're saying there's no sort of mistakes on the ground as far as administrative ones, but even here, right, we see movies where FBI and CIA, well, they're kind of fighting for turf, or in New York City, sometimes police and firemen. So over there, I mean, there are these very provincial districts where you have Dutch leaders, Dutch-speaking leaders, French-speaking leaders, and I mean, really area to area. Will Belgium, do you think, be able to come together and say, okay, this threat is greater?
Well, look, they've been trying, and certainly in the wake of the Paris attacks, they proposed, a couple dozen different changes to their counterterrorism procedures and regulations. None of those have gotten through the Parliament because it takes forever to get anything done there. That has to go through a variety of bodies and authorities before it even comes up for a vote. So, I don't think necessarily that, we're going to see a lot of changes quickly. There are always sort of territorial disputes between the various agencies, and there's a lot of various law enforcement organizations inside of Belgium, and just as there are in other countries. So could it be more efficient, to your point? Yes, absolutely it could be more efficient. But I guess what I'm saying is we want to be a little bit pragmatic in understanding that investigators and intel services can only operate within their framework that the government allows them to operate in.
So speaking of which, ISIS has been threatening basically new attacks. I mean, supposedly they sent 400 fighters back to Europe. So it's assumed that these are people who were trained in Iraq or trained in Syria or even in parts of Russia far from Moscow. Now, I mean, this attack apparently that happened this week was moved up from an Easter holiday plan. How do we prevent the next one?
Well, again, the unsatisfactory answer is by continuing to do all the heavy lift of the investigations, the heavy lift of the developing human sources, of doing communications intercepts, of, on a bigger picture of trying to take away the territory in Syria and Iraq. That's a critically important part of this. I worry, though, when you talked about the 400 fighters, I do worry that we've probably hit a critical mass in Europe. And what I mean by that is ISIS has been training and drawing in foreign fighters into Syria and Iraq now for a couple of years and sending those people back to Europe in particular. And I worry that we've sort of reached a tipping point. They have a sufficient mass of trained supporters now throughout not just Belgium but throughout the EU to carry out a variety of attacks.
Yeah, so they don't necessarily need to be in contact with a so-called ringleader or master planner in Syria. They've already been trained and just told to wreak havoc wherever they are.
Mm-hmm. Correct, yes, and they're working within established communities where there is sort of this network of support for the extremist movement, for the ISIS agenda. And so because of that, again, they've moved so many of these fighters. This is not a one-off. You know, we talk about, oh, I can't believe that the Paris and the Brussels attacks are linked. Well, there are far greater linkages at this point.
Yeah, and they're 2 hours apart, so as far as traveling, unfortunately, it's not that difficult.